You're listening to Healing Voices Project, where we share stories and the latest information from people who fight addiction every day. I'm Mike Torville, your host and author of Voices from the Fallen. Thank you for listening, for following, and most of all, for sharing with people you care about. Make your voice count too. Hello everybody, back again here at Healing Voices Project. I'm Mike Torville, your host of the show, and today we have our guest back again. His name is Mark Jachym, and Mark has been with us, about a year ago. He's become a good friend of our programs, so it's good to have you back, Mark.
Thanks, good to be back.
You always have a lot to talk about.
I don't know if that's good or bad.
No, that's good. That's really good. In fact, you're a very busy guy, and I really respect a lot of what you do for work, what you've gone through, your experiences, and that's why I always think, every time I talk to you, I learn something new, and I think about, again, what you've gone through, and we've got to know each other pretty well over the past year or two, primarily through the HCAT, Hamden County Addiction Task Force.
Right.
And then, of course, you become a good collaborator and friend of the Healing Voices Project, so we appreciate that.
Yes, you're welcome.
And thanks for coming in.
My pleasure.
So you've been sober 9 years now, is that correct?
April 1st will be 9 years. Yes, not
Wow.
there yet, but getting there.
Hey, I think you're about 9 days short of that, right?
Yeah, I never take anything for granted, but I'm looking forward to that, moving on to the next year.
Yeah. Well, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
And I will ask you, and we're going to get into a little bit about your background, how things evolve with you, what you've been through, and that I always think is helpful because others that are going through the same thing obviously feel like, okay, this guy gets it, he understands. With your knowledge, your experience, and all that you're doing, I think it becomes relatable to people, and I think that's always important to share.
Right.
So we'll get into that. But I will ask you first, in the 9 years, since April 1st, I believe, 2015.
Yes.
Have you ever relapsed, or have you stayed sober the entire 9 years?
I have not relapsed. I am 100% on the abstinent side. Coffee, yes, I do. Caffeine, yes. However, outside of anything that was really, truly mind-altering for me, I have been abstinent. And to me, people are like, oh, abstinence, that must mean that you're in an abstinence-based program. That got me on my feet originally, but I also look at my abstinence as my own form of harm reduction.
It works.
It works. I have
There's really nothing better, by the way.
I have not been arrested. I have not gone to jail. I have not been Section 35'd. I have not attempted to end my life while I've been sober. Those things did happen while I was using and drinking. So that's my harm reduction.
Yep. Abstinence works.
It does for me.
It's more easily said than done.
Correct.
And prior to 9 years, your attempts to stop, how did that go?
Not very well. I can't even throw a number at how many times I attempted. I'm sure it's in the hundreds.
The hundreds.
Hundreds. Even on those next mornings after a really rough night where you say, I'm never drinking again.
It's like that old saying, quitting's easy, I do it all the time.
Exactly.
Right?
Yes.
So you had some experience with that.
I certainly did.
Yeah.
And, there was nothing got me to where I am now except for my own realization that things needed to change. People telling me what I needed to do didn't work because I didn't want to listen to what other people were telling me to do. And it just, it was very, very difficult to really stop everything. When I was done using cocaine, I was done using cocaine. When I was done with Percocet, I was done with Percocet. When I was done with codeine, I was done with codeine. But when it came time to stop using alcohol, that was really, really difficult. That was the problem.
We're going to get into your background a little bit, but before that, though, I will ask a question because I don't want to forget to ask it later.
Sure.
The hundreds of times that you tried and it didn't work, and then the one time it did.
Yes.
What was the difference? What made the difference that time?
So this week in 2015, I had been arrested 2 times.
In 1 week?
In 1 week. Woke up in the same holding cell in Agawam, Massachusetts at their police station, and both times looking up at the ceiling going, oh no, this does not look like a good place. And after the second arrest on March 31st of 2015.
What were you arrested for?
I was violating a restraining order. I had gotten pretty well drunk and wanted to go visit my then girlfriend, now wife.
Okay.
Yeah, so
that restraining order is still not in place anymore?
No, that one's gone, thankfully. But after the second arrest on March 31st, I did attempt to end my life in that holding cell. And after I started to really, and I'm not going to get too graphic or anything like that, but after I made the attempt and I was feeling myself kind of fade off into the sunset, so to speak, I panicked and said, oh my God, I can't do this. I have my family, I have my girlfriend at the time. I had all these different things. My daughter, I didn't want her to be the child of a person who did that when I just, so that was it.
So you became so close within minutes.
Yes.
And something hit you, the reality of all the important things in your life.
Yes.
That you just somehow were able to stop and I won't say snap out of it, but the realization hit you harder than it ever had before.
Completely.
And then what happened?
So after I managed to remove the ligature.
The ligature.
Yes, I had a long sleeve shirt on at the time that I used around my neck.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a pretty good knot, and I managed to, don't ask me how I managed to do that, but the panic actually must have done something where I removed it, loosened it up, and about 10 seconds after that, when I kind of regrouped and realized what I had just attempted to do, I had asked the officer on the floor if I could make a phone call, because I knew at that point I needed to change things. So I called my parents at 4:21 a.m. on, at that point it was April 1st at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Where did that land you after that?
So I called. My mother answered on the first ring. Go figure. She knew something was up, right? So I told her that I needed help, that I can't do this any longer. Told her where I was, the whole thing. And she put my father on the phone, and my father was like, "What do you need from us?" And I said, "I need you guys to meet me in court tomorrow morning, excuse me, at Westfield District Court, because I have a funny feeling I'm going to be going away for a while." Judge Content in Westfield had seen me in front of his courtroom a multitude of times. I lost count, and he basically had said to me, "If I see you here again, you're looking at the fullest extent that I can give you for any type of jail time."
Mm-hmm.
So they met me at court the next morning, and I had an absolutely amazing attorney, Kathleen Kavanaugh, who spoke with me and spoke with my parents. And at that point, they decided that the situation I was in was pretty dire, and they granted me, the Judge Content granted me a Section 35 that my mother and father had applied for. Now, I'm not a huge fan of Section 35s. I don't know if I have mentioned that anywhere in the past, but for me at that situation, I was willing to do whatever I had to do and go
Just
wherever.
for people listening who might not be aware of what Section 35 is, can you explain that briefly?
So it's an involuntary commitment that the state of Massachusetts has for folks that are struggling with substance use, and as soon as I said struggling, I don't even like using that word, but it's for families can apply for it, police officers, doctors. I've even had some of my own folks that I meet with in the community go down in front of a judge and explain their situation to the judge, and the judge will grant them the Section 35 based off of their own story. So they do it themselves. Doesn't happen very often, but it does happen occasionally.
Okay, so it's involuntary, obviously, so you're forced to go.
Yes.
For how long?
So you can go for up to 90 days. I was sent down to Brockton, the Men's Addiction Treatment Center down there, and I spent 23 days there. And then I was discharged. I went back to my apartment in Westfield.
Okay. And you hadn't, from that point, you hadn't touched any?
Correct. My last substance of any kind was early evening on March 31st, 2015.
Well, congratulations. You're just days short of that 9-year mark. Yeah.
Yes, thanks.
And you know, it's just kind of like when you see a movie, you see sort of the end and then you go back. We're going to do that a little bit here.
Okay.
Because it didn't just happen overnight. You didn't just have a bad week and get arrested twice in 1 week.
Right.
The circumstances led to that. So just briefly talk about how this progressed, when it started, and you're a relatively young guy. So anyway, you had 20 years of use, give or take?
I started, my first drink was when I had just turned 13. And then when my final use was 2015. So that is 1983 to 2015. It's like 35 years or something along those lines.
It's a lot of time using to undo.
Yes.
And you started at 13 as a teenager, started using. I'm sure it started with alcohol.
Yep.
And ended with alcohol as well.
Yes.
Because that was a constant throughout this.
It sure was.
And then using, it worked its way into other drugs. You talked about, well, I want to jump ahead, but through your teens and 20s, this just progressed. How did it lead to using other drugs?
Yeah, mostly in high school and college it was just alcohol. I smoked a little weed here and there. It wasn't really my thing. I was more into the stimulant type stuff after that. I still drank my booze all the time, every day, but there was also some cocaine involved. When I say some, I should say a lot. So I was doing that, and it was more so, I look back now and I never really used it when I wasn't drinking. It was always, all right, I'm going to be drinking, so I want to really keep it going. So what better substance to use
That's
than...
pretty common, yeah.
Yeah. And, it was, I won't lie, I enjoyed that. It was, I like to be awake. That was pretty darn awake.
It kept you going, yeah.
It did.
Yeah.
It just allowed me to drink a lot more. And, that was not good.
Progressed through your 20s and your 30s.
Yes. Into early 40s as well. And
Now, did you, during that time when a lot of people in their 20s and 30s start getting married, having kids and all that stuff, and jobs, you were going through all of that as well?
I had my jobs, yep.
Yeah.
I was doing everything everybody else I was around was doing pretty much.
Yeah.
And it just was one of those things where, to me, it didn't seem out of the ordinary. It didn't seem over the top. It seemed just 100% natural.
Part of normal life, right?
Correct.
When did things start to take a turn?
Probably, let's say 2010-ish, things really started to go downhill. And I was drinking like I've never drank before. I was just strictly 100 proof vodka straight every day, at least a fifth of it, which is, you know.
And I'll ask you this, Mark. What do you think made that happen? Was it stress? Was it depression? Was there other factors that contributed to that increase of drinking?
There was a whole bunch of factors. I've been diagnosed with depression. I had been diagnosed with anxiety. They had even tried to diagnose me with PTSD from my time working with the sheriff's department and some of the things I've seen, some of the things I've
exposed to and so on.
Yeah. And I had lost my grandmother when I was 13 years old, and I look back, that hit me more than anything. And I also, when I was 13, I didn't have a lot of self-esteem, self-confidence, nothing. And
that stayed with you.
Yeah.
So now your drinking was exacerbated by things and it just increased. And like you said, 2010, it started getting worse. Or you drank so much that it started to affect your life.
Yes.
Your job, your relationships, and so on.
Correct.
It took a turn for the worse.
Yes. There was a divorce, there was child custody, but there was all kinds of things like that were going on.
Things were unraveling.
Yes. Yeah. And I didn't handle it the way I should have. I went the total opposite direction. What I should have done was probably reached out to my old therapist and said, hey, I need to talk to you again. But I didn't do any of that.
Yeah.
And then as time went by, I had there was a lot of police involvement. There was, restraining orders. There was all kinds of things. I was getting arrested for operating under the influence. And then I was violating my probation. I had gone to jail, and none of that was even a deterrent. I knew what I was looking at if I continued doing what I was doing, but
you did it anyway.
Yeah.
Hence the addiction aspect of this thing, despite the consequences, just continued to do it.
And I thought I would sneak away, would never get caught again doing anything. But
you just thought you were smarter.
I thought I was slick.
Yeah. Now get into, because I do want to, because this is important to have how your history and your experiences led to what you're doing now, and then things got to a point. You mentioned when we were talking earlier. When you had stopped for a little bit, but then you had shoulder surgery, right?
It was back surgery, so it was really bothering my shoulder.
Okay.
But it was technically back surgery.
Okay.
Yes.
And then what happened from that?
So I had gone in and I had let them know I was in recovery at the time.
Yeah.
And I had said to the doctor, I was like, I'm in recovery. After the surgery, I don't want any prescription for Vicodin, Percocet, Oxy, none of that. I will take the Motrin 800 or 600 or whatever they have, and we'll go that way. And when I came out of surgery, the first thing they did was they gave me a Vicodin. And it's part of the surgery after, So, okay, that's part of the surgery, but I don't want the prescription. And they did try at one point to write a prescription for me saying, should you need these, here you go. And I did not take any of those. I didn't even take the prescription because I specifically said I'm in recovery and don't want that. So I don't know how much the medical community in that hospital at the time was really paying attention to what their guests were really saying to them. So.
But you did not take them?
No.
They were right in front of you?
Yes.
And you didn't?
No.
Good. Well, yeah, that's tough. That's not easy, especially when you're in pain and not thinking all that clearly after surgery.
Right.
Despite that, you still sustained from.
Yes. Well, and I mean, that doesn't work for everybody. There's some people that may think, hey, this is part of the surgery, it's part of the aftercare, and I'm going to take them as prescribed, and that may not work for them. And
Yep. So all of these, and your life was turned upside down. You're in and out of court, in and out of jail, relapsing. You lost track of how many times. You said perhaps hundreds, because it just went on and on like this. And then April 1st came. You ended up in court that day. You go away for 23 days.
Yes.
And after that, you come home. That was in late April of 2015.
Right.
So then, and this is the important part of this, obviously, and why you're here, to talk about where that led to the work you do now, what you do now for work, what occupies your day, what you see, and how you're helping people. That's all a lot of questions, but let's just start how things led to what you do now, and to talk about your job, outreach. What does that mean? What are you doing, and how did things turn and put you into this field?
So, when I first, early in sobriety, I was going to a lot of meetings. I was meeting with my therapist, doing all kinds of things of that nature. I was not working really. Nobody would hire me. I now had a criminal record.
You had a history
Exactly, and those are barriers for a lot of people, and that was one for me. But I had awesome family support. My mother, my father, my sister, my now wife, who I mentioned earlier, is a tremendous support for me and has been ever since.
Stuck with you throughout.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, there were some rocky times in there. I'm not going to lie about that, but hey, she's stuck with me. So
what would you have done without that support from her, your mom, dad, and your sister?
Yeah, I wouldn't be here talking to you. I would imagine that without the love and compassion that everybody was giving me and the serious amounts of support, I would have probably gone back out doing what I was doing eventually. Maybe not right away, but eventually. And my guess is I would either be in jail or I would be dead.
You'd be dead, yeah.
Yes. So, but going into the other part of what you were asking, I had finally been given an opportunity to work at a mental health agency in Springfield, where the woman who hired me, Amy Conklin, is... I will thank her until the end of days for giving me that opportunity. Because once I got my foot in the door, I started working with folks who were using substances. Most of them were direct with me and said, "I'm not going to stop. I just want to learn how to not get to the extreme of I may be arrested, I may end up in the hospital, I may get arrested, crash a car, whatever." So working with Amy gave me the opportunity to also branch out and start meeting some other people. I have a good friend of mine that worked at Friends of the Homeless in Springfield. That ended up being an opening for me to get a job there and start working there. And I worked with veterans and folks, again, who were still actively using or in early recovery themselves. So I just kept building the networking. And now I ended up getting a position in Springfield of community outreach coordinator, and I'm still using all those contacts I made throughout everywhere, whether it was my time in jail, when I worked at the jail, when I was at my Section 35. I still see people on the streets that I knew from there, and doing that type of work, it was almost like I was meant to be here. Whatever I went through has led me to sitting here right now with you talking about what got me here and what I'm doing.
Right, yeah.
So I'm now doing the community outreach, and I think that's a really important part of harm reduction, recovery, even just talking to people. It's huge for communities to have somebody doing that.
Yeah, and what you're doing, and again, you're a well-respected member of the community, and how we met through Hannah County Addiction Task Force, and I know that you're involved with many groups, task forces, committees, and so on like that. But let's talk about what is community outreach, and the outreach work you do. What does that entail, and what do you see when you're out there?
So I have a trunk full of items for folks. I go to encampments. I go to places that I know that folks are that are well-known areas where people may be using their substances, whether it's alcohol.
When you say you go there because you just go there, or are you instructed or directed or told by someone? You just know where to go.
I know where to go. I also have my contacts, whether it's through the folks at Tapestry who may know somebody that needs my assistance.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, I work pretty closely with some of the folks with the Springfield Police Department. And they may call me up and say, hey, Mark, there's somebody that we've been seeing and talking with on the street, but we're not making any impact and we don't want to arrest them. Would you be willing to go and meet with them? And yeah, of course I would. I would rather help somebody. If the option is being under arrest or forced treatment, I'm there. I'm gonna do what I can to make that not happen.
What happens when you show up?
There's times where people tell me to, nope, don't want to talk to you. Get out of here. Go kick rocks, and I will. I'll leave. I'll tell them if they ever need me, this is where I'm at. But usually the conversation is just, hey, how you doing today? And it'll start slowly, and then I'll find something. I may be like, they may be wearing a Bruin sweatshirt or something, and I'll say, hey, look at me, I'm wearing,
Yeah.
and we'll build off of that. And it's just very basic. It's authentic. It's not, I don't read off a list of,
right.
Okay, when I see this person, I need to introduce myself, I need to do this.
You kind of intuitively know what to do because you've been there.
Yes.
And you understand what resistance you might encounter.
Right.
And how to hopefully work through that as much as you can. And this is ongoing. This is a daily thing for you.
Yeah. And I love doing it, as odd as that may sound. Some people always wonder how I can do such a thing. It's got to be depressing and everything. And it's hard. It's hard work. This isn't something that, you go out on the street and it's all, hey, what's up? How we doing today? You see some folks at a pretty bad place in their life, and it's hard. There's a lot of secondary trauma to it, but it's also a necessary thing, I believe.
And that's just the trauma, what you see, what they're going through, and I would imagine that there's some people you see who don't make it.
Yes.
And that's got to take its toll.
Yes. And a lot of times it's people I already know from some form of my past, whether it's working with them or I've known them even growing up. I've lost count of the amount of times I've had to administer Narcan on people, and 2 of those folks didn't make it, and that's hard.
And you've been doing this for a number of years, and besides the years you've been doing this, prior your experiences, what do you see that's changed recently in terms of access, the type of drugs? What's different now?
Well, the drug supply is constantly changing.
Changing and increasing, right?
Yes. It used to be, people would just drink, and then there'd be a certain group of folks that were just drinking. Then there was a certain groups of folks that were using heroin and other things. And then all of a sudden, I don't know the exact month and date that it started to come in, but in Western Mass, let's call it 4 years ago. Roughly, before COVID-ish, that all of a sudden fentanyl started coming around, and that was a whole different animal. And, we saw the numbers of folks that we lost due to overdose skyrocket.
Yeah.
And
fentanyl's basically replaced the heroin.
Yeah. I don't even know of anywhere that, it's very rare that I look at the websites where the drugs have been checked and it says heroin as the number 1 ingredient. It's usually not even there. So the adulterants that are in there now, Xylazine, that's all over the place, and it's not like the old days where most of it wasn't 100% pure, of course, but there was nothing in there that was going to hurt you. The cocaine in the days that I was doing it maybe had baby laxative cut into it or things like that. Caffeine, it's not.
And it was small. It was
right.
Pretty much cocaine. Was what it was. And now you're right. You don't know what it is. It could be deadly. Mm-hmm. The amount of fentanyl that can kill you, as you said earlier, it can fit on the tip of a pencil.
And that's what the DEA has sent out to everybody. They always show the penny with a couple of specks of fentanyl or the tip of a pencil. And there's a tolerance that people have on things. Body weight also plays a part into things. So I mean,
the point is made. It takes a
Yes.
tiny little bit, no matter what, and,
Especially if
yeah.
you're not expecting it.
Yeah, and you can't tell if it's got fentanyl in it or not, but that small amount is, one, undetectable and extremely harmful, obviously
Yes.
fatal in many cases. And Xylazine now is very new, but talk about what Xylazine is, how often you see it, and what happens, what's different about it than fentanyl.
So that's an animal tranquilizer.
Mm-hmm.
I was with Stephen Murray yesterday from Boston Medical Center. He was doing a training up in Northampton, and he was talking about how all the studies that are out there are not on humans. They're on animals. Like if a moose stepped into a bear trap or something along those lines, those are the types of situations where xylazine was used to help that animal. There's nothing for humans. But we do see that when people are, if you have a little cut on your arm and you're using xylazine, then that can
Spread.
yeah, and it goes into some of the wounds that are out there are just so horrifying and
Seen that.
awful that they lead to amputation.
Yeah, it almost looks like leprosy. I mean, it's so bad.
And
Just, yeah.
it's the tissue dies, and it's not supposed to be meant for humans, and yet it is. And who knows what the future brings with the drug supply? Maybe xylazine will be the number one. That might be
It's heading that way.
Kind of looks it right now.
But what is the difference in the high versus fentanyl, and why people are opting to use xylazine over what is the point?
So back in the day, heroin would last for a while.
Yeah.
And then fentanyl is very short acting, so
Yeah.
you have to use it more often.
Uh-huh.
When you use xylazine or put xylazine into the fentanyl, it extends, we say on the street, it gives it legs, so it'll make you feel, a little bit
Longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is the xylazine withdrawals are pretty horrendous. Opioid withdrawals are horrendous to begin with, as well as alcohol. But those types of things. And one of the things that I've had people tell me quite a bit over the last 6 months to a year is that it also helps regulate their sleep, though. Whereas they have to wake up every few hours to not feel sick, so they continue using their fentanyl. And then with the xylazine, they can actually get a few hours in there. But that's, not
But
exactly.
it's a trade-off, honestly, because you're trading off the other consequences, the other effects of xylazine,
Right.
the sores and possible amputation and other
Yes.
health issues there.
And let's not forget that a lot of folks, especially those outside, unsheltered, unhoused, if they're by themselves, they're not going to want to sleep at night. So they may not want to use that xylazine and fentanyl at night, the tranq, and they'll use their stimulants, cocaine, crack, meth. So there's a lot of multiple substances being used right now out there in the communities.
Well, you've certainly seen a lot, and you're seeing a lot of changes over time, and it's pretty tough. And I give you a lot of credit because you just keep going, and you keep going, and keep going. And certainly the access is greater than it was, and so anybody, is very concerning, especially with young adults and teenagers.
Right.
That's a scary thought.
Yes. And you can talk to some of the high school guidance counselors. I'm very tight with a couple in Westfield.
Mm-hmm.
And so the stories that they tell me that they hear from the kids they're heartbreaking. Whether it's them themselves that are actually using these substances, or maybe their parents, their siblings, grandparents even.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it affects everybody.
It does, and I got 4 grandkids. One's in college, 2 are in high school, and 1 is 5. Concern of every level here,
Right.
what's going to go,
Yep.
what they are exposed to, and even sometimes unintentionally. And it's very tough. One, she is 16 and wrestles and she injured her ankle.
Oh.
And so you think, okay, what are they giving her after that, and what's
Right.
this going to possibly lead to? And then, okay, I have lots of injuries, and that's okay. But then what happens is it's just a conversation from a classmate, from a teammate that says, hey, you know what? This will help.
Right.
And then that happens. And she's a great kid, and I have no inkling that will happen, but it's a possibility.
It's always a possibility.
Right.
And part of what I usually tell people is have an open conversation
Yeah.
with them.
Yeah.
You know, don't sugarcoat things. Don't try to put the fear of,
Don't overdo it. No,
yeah, you know, because sometimes that backfires. I used to have people tell me all the time, "Oh God, don't do this because this will make you, it will? Really? Well, maybe I will try that when you're not here then." And that happened quite often. But I have two amazing stepchildren. One is 22, the other one just turned 18, and I have unbelievable conversation with both of them. So
Very open conversations.
very open and honest. It's pretty direct, and you don't need to scare people. The truth is scary enough.
As I was going to ask you before we close, we're starting to run out of time, is a couple things. One is what you said in the very beginning, I think, is the most important thing. It's so obvious, but yet abstinence is really, truly the most effective way, right? You can't debate that one. However, it's easily said. And so
Yes.
going back to what you would say, this is how I was going to sort of wrap up. And there's not a magic thing to say because people are people, but the best way to prevent or to combat or at least to address this, especially with their teens and young adults, is what? To do what you said, just have an open conversation, or is there any more to it than?
I mean, that's what I think. At the very minimum,
Yeah.
Have that conversation. For me, abstinence is what works. That may not work for everybody. It may be I just need to do a lot less, and that way I can get to work for the day, and do that. So, but ultimately, wouldn't you like to wave a magic wand and have?
Well, that's it. There isn't one, yeah.
Right.
But at the very least, what we find is at least effective to some degree. And saying, well, okay. And again, I think it starts with what you said, having that conversation and creating an awareness.
Yes.
And an awareness with your teen, your child, and it doesn't have to be teens, your children in their 20s and 30s, and mine are in their 40s now, and it still doesn't matter.
Yeah.
So it's just a thing of having that conversation and saying, look, I'm aware, I'm thinking about this, let's talk about it. And sometimes that at least makes them think a little bit.
Yeah. And then if something should happen negatively, they may feel a heck of a lot more comfortable coming to you and saying, hey, remember that conversation we had? Well, I didn't exactly follow through on my end on it, and this is now happening. And it may happen, it may not, but it gives the opportunity for the individual to feel safe, to feel not stigmatized, and just like I can open up and just say what's happening.
Yeah, and it goes back to, again, the support that you got from your mom, dad, your sister, and your now wife.
Yes.
If it wasn't for them, you might not be alive today. And the same applies to if it wasn't for the support that people can give, and even it starts from a conversation, starts from a place of honesty, to say, hey, look, here's what I'm thinking of or thought about or, want to know more about. That support starts from a conversation in the beginning.
Yeah.
And you're right. So that is the difference maker.
And I will say this until I'm blue in the face, that you don't need to scare people. The scared straight stuff that's for the birds.
Yeah.
If you tell somebody what is the legitimate facts on these type of situations, that alone should be enough to make people think twice.
Yeah.
It's not going to all the time, but.
And even to a place of saying, look, and if anything does come up, you can talk to me.
Right.
You can come back.
Right.
Don't be afraid to.
Right.
And that's important. Mark, good talking to you as always. Hey,
You
buddy,
too.
Thanks a lot.
All right.
And again, I always like talking with you, and so we'll always have you back.
Cool.
All right.
Let me know when.
All right. Thanks again.
Thanks.
And everybody, this is Mark Jachym from
Westfield.
All over. I was
Yeah,
going
I
to
was
say
gonna
you're
say
from all
Springfield,
over.
Westfield,
But thanks again, Mark, and thanks everybody for listening. We'll see y'all soon. All right.